Tonight, Jemele Hill, ESPN anchor, suspended for another controversial tweet. It was just 1 month ago that she went after President Trump, saying this on Twitter. President Trump, Donald Trump, she said, is a white supremacist who has largely surrounded himself with other white supremacists. Despite widespread outrage over those comments, ESPN at that point took no action. They gave her basically a slap on the wrist for that. Fast forward 1 month later, she now takes to Twitter, going against Cowboys owner Jerry Jones and his mandate that all of his players, he said, would stand for the national anthem. She tweeted this: "Change happens when advertisers are impacted. If you feel strongly about Jerry Jones's statement, boycott his advertisers." This latest tweet, one that takes on the NFL and the people who put money in the network's pockets, has elicited a slightly different response from ESPN this time around. In a statement earlier today, the network wrote this: "Jemele Hill's been suspended for a couple of weeks, 2 weeks, for a second violation of our social media guidelines. She previously acknowledged letting her colleagues down and her company down with an impulsive tweet." So that's where we are today. Brian Kilmeade, host of Fox and Friends, also hosting Fox Tonight at 10 o'clock Eastern. I thought you came home for this breaking news.
I would have come in for you, though.
I know you would.
But this is unbelievable, this story.
Right?
I mean, here's an anchor who's got a show at 6 o'clock with Mike Hill. It's having reasonable success at ESPN. Dodged a bullet, so to speak, when she did not get suspended the first time around. But now she doubles down. And when she says this, what do you expect ESPN to do? They spend $15 billion to get the NFL contract. And she's subtly, indirectly calling for a boycott of Dallas Cowboy goods, tickets. You got to be kidding me. An anchor calling out the Cowboys on a network that spends $15 billion to carry teams like the Cosmos, like the Cowboys, that makes absolutely no sense. I mean, anyone in our business knows that's going to be trouble. Or does she want this?
You know, she was criticized all the way from the press room, the White House press room. Sarah Huckabee Sanders basically saying that the White House felt that it was a fireable offense to call the president a white supremacist without any basis. And, you know, now she's going to get 2 weeks essentially. We don't know. She might be getting paid. We don't know, right?
We don't know. But think about this. Think Progress actually had a story that has not been refuted, that after she came out with that tweet against President Trump, they said to her, "Stay off the air. You're off the air tonight." Her co-host said, "If she's off the air, I'm off the air." So they said, "Okay, fine, you're both off the air." They went into the newsroom to get another African-American host, and they said, "No, we're not going on either." So they let them go on. So that was a crisis averted, perhaps. Now what's going on in that newsroom? Now what's the backlash outside her? Now Jemele Hill sits back and she says, "Okay, I'm not hosting my show for 2 weeks." And then who's going to? Who's going to step in there right now? And Al Sharpton,
I believe her co-host has said that he's not going to do the show while she's gone either.
Well,
right?
That I am not sure about, but I will say this. Al Sharpton has already weighed in with a tweet. Al Sharpton tends to be a rabble-rouser. Here he says ESPN suspension of Jemele Hill is an outrage and should not, in caps, go unanswered. ESPN and advertisers will hear from us. What a mess.
I mean, it's all a debate, you know, that's been going on for the last month or so. Now, she's very upset that Jerry Jones is essentially forcing his players to stand for the anthem. And she's saying, you know, everybody should boycott Jerry Jones for that. It's her choice, but, you know, it's ESPN's choice whether or not they want to keep her on the air, especially now that they're going after their own purse strings.
Maybe I'm old-fashioned, but if ESPN hires you and they spend $15 billion, you do what they want. If you don't want that, I'm sure there's ways to get out of a contract. If the Cowboys owner Jerry Jones tells his players who work for him, even though they own 55% of the revenues, said, "Guys, I need you to stand up and salute because people are looking at this as anti-American. That hurts our product. It hurts your pocketbook, too." You do it. And the Cowboys did it. Although a few fists were in the air, I understand, saying black power. He said, if I see someone not standing or showing a demonstration, I bench them. Now, what if all the Cowboys take a knee? Do you not play a game? Does Jerry Jones says we don't play today?
I mean, it could come to that. I mean, he could lose a large number of players. How many of the Cowboys, you know, they all stood for the last one, right?
All stood. Two, I believe 1 or 2 fists were in the air, I guess symbolizing black power. We know 23 San Francisco 49ers sat, about a third as many as 2 weeks ago when President Trump called them SOBs.
Yeah, we're just getting ready for Monday Night Football tonight. What do you think the overall impact? Because it felt like this was sort of starting to dissipate a little bit, but now it's completely fired up again.
Well, when the vice president came down to salute Peyton Manning's career and had his number retired and then decided to walk out when he was offended by the 23 players that took a knee, people said, well, that was a stunt. He goes, not really. My son's in the Marines. I'm the vice president of the United States. I cannot stay for this. And by the way, if it's a stunt, someone should have told Mrs. Pence, because she was wearing a Peyton Manning jersey. I'm sure she wanted to get to halftime and watch his number be retired because he's so much more than a football player, especially to the people of Indianapolis. This is getting bigger and bigger, from the NFL to individual teams and now to networks.
Yep. We'll see what happens tonight, Monday Night Football. Brian, thank you so much. We'll look for you tonight at 10 o'clock, too.
Absolutely. Thanks, Martha.
All right. Also, some very big news tonight. Moments ago, Sheriff Joe Lombardo giving an update on the Las Vegas shooting Vegas investigation. Listen to this.
Immediately upon being injured, notified security of his situation. In close proximity of Mr. Campos being shot, there was also a maintenance worker that presented himself on the 32nd floor, and Mr. Campos prevented him from receiving any injuries. We know that he attempted to shoot at the fuel tanks. We know that he had some personal protection equipment in the room. We have uncovered no evidence to show there was a second shooter. We have uncovered over 200 instances of the suspects traveling throughout Las Vegas, and he has never been seen with anyone else. No evidence or intelligence that the suspect was linked or had affiliation with any known terrorist groups or ideologies. In coordination with the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit, a comprehensive picture is being drawn as to the suspect's mental state, and currently we do not believe there is one particular event in the suspect's life for us to key on.
Just incredible. I mean, they are still having a very tough time figuring out the trigger that set him off, Stephen Paddock. Joining me now with more, Lieutenant Colonel Michael Waltz, a former Special Forces operator who's an expert on what it takes to execute this kind of shooting. He's also a Fox News contributor. Candace DeLong back on the story tonight, former FBI agent and criminal profiler. Good to have both of you here. You know, you hear the story of Jesus Campos, who was wounded and stayed outside in that hallway during the course of this entire shooting until it was clear where it was going on. I mean, it's just unbelievable what that man went through. But you talk, Colonel, about the difficulty of a civilian pulling off what this guy pulled off. It's remarkable.
You know, Martha, I'm just still astounded, as I'm sure so many others are, that this individual with no military background, no law enforcement training, with no help, could pull something this sophisticated, this type of what we in the military call a far ambush, off like this. Just a bit in the geometry of it. We call it a kill box where the bullets are going to fall, and Paddock was essentially on full auto down at 1,000-foot, kind of the length of the hypotenuse triangle. Where you could have just 1 degree variance, and those bullets are then going to fly outside of what we call the kill box, was able to stay on full auto, change multiple weapons, multiple magazines. The barrels get hot when you put that many rounds through so that the rounds become inaccurate, and was still able to strike several hundred targets. I just find it astounding. I don't, unfortunately, have any more conclusions than the investigators do, but I have a heck of a lot of questions how he did this by himself. Yeah,
I mean, we know he had those calculations written down on the notepad, so he was clearly trying to figure out the dynamic of exactly what you're talking about, and unfortunately,
and
with
Martha,
deadly consequences.
Martha, he had just been engaged and intercepted by Campos, who was incredibly brave. So the fact that he didn't have his adrenaline going, that he wasn't sweating, that he wasn't, really kind of worked up and was able to stay that calm and collected and to keep pouring that much fire into, it's kind of like a spotlight going from the building and able to keep it concentrated really is just unbelievable.
Awful. Candace, so we know a few more things. He was on Valium for anxiety. He had a Dr. Stephen Winkler in Las Vegas who was supplying him with that anxiety medication. Prostitutes on a regular basis. He said that, because of his bank robber father, he told one of those prostitutes he had a bad streak in his blood, and he'd spend 14 hours a day at video poker machines in Las Vegas. What do you make of all that?
Well, this is not a normal guy. We know that. One of the more concerning things for me, most interesting things, is that he appears to have been taking Valium off and on for a number of years, 3 to 4 years. Long-term, Valium is not meant for long-term use. It can be a dangerous drug because it can build up a toxicity in the brain. I'm wondering, this is the kind of thing a patient on long-term anxiety medication should be being managed by a psychiatrist, not a family practitioner. So I'm hoping some more information comes forward about that.
Now, I would imagine they'll do an autopsy of him, right? Is that something that they could figure out,
Yes.
looking at him and looking at his
Absolutely.
brain in terms of how long the Valium would have been in his body?
Absolutely, and one of the part of an autopsy would be the toxicology study. Those take 4 to 6 weeks to return, and that will reveal, did he have any Valium, which is an anti-anxiety agent, in his blood at the time, and if so, was it a therapeutic level? Was it really, really high? Was it not there at all? If somebody's used to taking a lot of Valium and then they suddenly stop, when the anxiety returns, it can be worse than it was in the beginning before, plus depression.
And on top of that, you have this incredibly focused ability to pull off the horrific crime that he did, as Colonel Walsh just pointed out. Thank you both. Good to see you tonight.
Thank you.
So coming up next, President Trump and Senator Bob Corker in an epic feud. This has gotten really ugly. Senator Corker firing the latest shot, tweeting, "It is shameful that the White House has become an adult daycare center," he writes. "Someone obviously missed their shift this morning." Ed Henry and Congressman Peter King are next as the White House promises that they are not finished dealing with Senator Corker. Oh, what does that mean? Plus, the president going into a dealmaker mode over immigration and healthcare reform. Karl Rove joins us to break down the whirlwind 48 hours at 1600 Pennsylvania. What are they doing, really, in terms of policy? We'll tell you. And Harvey Weinstein out from his own company after a growing list of sexual harassment allegations that get uglier by the minute. New details claim that it wasn't just Hollywood who helped to keep this a secret for years. The press was involved as well. We'll explain next.
I think there's a definite possibility that this will be a watershed moment in Hollywood.
I think Secretary Tillerson, Secretary Mattis, and Chief of Staff Kelly are those people that help separate our country from chaos.
That was what kind of sparked this whole thing off. That was Tennessee Senator Bob Corker last week. He took a shot at President Trump and the White House drama there. And then yesterday, President Trump hit back in a series of tweets, igniting a feud with Bob Corker from Tennessee, who's decided not to run again. So he's pretty much unleashed. Fox News chief national correspondent Ed Henry live at the White House with more on this that has gotten pretty ugly, Ed.
It sure is, Martha. And new tonight, we now have Vice President Mike Pence jumping in, defending President Trump in a big way, even though he and his aides are not characterizing it as a rebuke of Senator Bob Corker. You can really read it no other way. All this starting yesterday, as you noted, the president growing furious about that comment from Corker a few days ago, suggesting that the only thing separating the country from chaos is that triumvirate he mentioned, Rex Tillerson, James Mattis, and Chief of Staff John Kelly, pulling the president back from rash decisions. The president unleashed a Twitter barrage declaring Corker, quote, begged me to endorse him for re-election in Tennessee. I said no, and he dropped out. Said he could not win without my endorsement. He also wanted to be Secretary of State. I said no thanks. He is also largely responsible for the horrendous Iran deal, the president charged. Corker insists the president called him, in fact, last week to say he would endorse him if he reconsidered his decision to retire from the Senate at the end of next year. Corker tweeting a pretty fiery response, quote, it's a shame the White House has become an adult daycare center. Someone obviously missed their shift this morning. He's talking about Sunday morning. Then Corker decided to vent to the New York Times, going even further. They've just posted the audio. Listen in.
Yeah, sometimes I feel like he's on a reality show of some kind, you know, when he's talking about these big foreign policy issues. And, and you know, he doesn't realize that, you know, that we could be heading towards World War III.
World War III. Strong talk there. Well, Vice President Pence didn't stand for that, offering a full-throated defense of the president in a statement tonight saying, quote, while critics engage in empty rhetoric and baseless attacks under the president's leadership, ISIS is on the run. North Korea is isolated like never before, and our NATO allies are doing more to pay their fair share for our common defense. There were also top Republicans on the Hill today taking sides. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell calling Corker an important player on key issues on the president's agenda, while Congressman Mark Meadows, he lashed out. You remember, he leads the Freedom Caucus, and he said, look, Corker's just being bold now because he's planning to retire, and that basically it's easy to take these shots when you're leaving town, Martha.
Wow. Ed, thank you very much. Here now with more, New York Congressman Peter King. He sits on both the House Homeland Security and House Intelligence Committees. Congressman, good to see you tonight. What do you make of this whole thing?
It doesn't help anybody. First of all, I don't think Senator Corker should have said what he did last week about the president. I think he's an outstanding senator and a real outstanding public servant. But he shouldn't have made the remark he did. But the president shouldn't allow himself to get dragged into these fights. I agree. He's doing an excellent job against ISIS. I believe he is isolating North Korea. And again, he's rebuilding the military, standing with the police. I'm on his side totally with the national anthem. But he shouldn't get involved in fights with Senator Corker or the mayor of San Juan or CNN about the size of the crowd at the inauguration. He's the president of the United States. He's doing a good job. He should focus on that.
But you know, as well as everybody who watches this president, that he cannot help himself, Congressman.
Right.
He does not like to let any comment go unanswered. And Bob Corker, you know, really got down in the mud with him with the daycare center comment and all of that. And he knows that that will needle the president and he'll keep going. I mean, what do you think Corker's motive is here?
Along with Juan Williams, Jesse Waters, Jillian
again,
Turner,
it must be something
and Greg
personal.
Gutfeld.
Something must
It's
have
5
happened
o'clock
between
in New
the
York
two of them.
City, and this is
because,
the file.
again, on policy issues, he's pretty close to the president. They play golf together, and he was being considered
a new
Secretary
push
of State.
on immigration. President Trump is reaching across the aisle to strike a deal with Democrats on so-called dreamers. In return, the president wants funding to
I
pay
think
for the
Lindsey Graham
border
played
wall.
golf with him today, though, and they've had a lot of differences, too. So, you know, as we all know, sometimes things can be ironed out on the golf course, so we say. I just want to ask you this, though, because Bob Corker basically said, you know,
mandatory e-verify system, which confirms an immigrant's work eligibility, and a new points-based system for green cards.
You know, Tillerson and Madison Kelly can keep the president in the middle of the road and not let him sway off. Is he right about that? Are the rest of the congressmen on the Hill with him on this?
We told the president at our meeting that we were open to reasonable border security measures alongside the DREAM Act.
The fact
but
is,
this list goes so far beyond what is reasonable. This proposal fails to represent any attempt to compromise. Meanwhile, the president's counselor has this message for critics
so far,
on the left.
after 9 months, when you look at the record, it's a good record. It's a really, he's moving the country forward. So, no, and listen, I do have a great regard for General Mattis and General Kelly. But again, the president appointed them, and he works with them. And I just think Bob Corker is overreacting here a bit. No, listen, I hear some Republicans, you know, they get nervous. You get some nervous guys in the party. But for the most part, people are standing with the president, and they should.
Well, do you think, you know, that Corker and, you know, some people, J.D. Vance spoke out today, actually, saying that he was mad at Corker, and he's from the South as well. And he said, you know, he's part of the problem. He's part of the establishment. They're fighting hard to hold on to what they've got on the Hill. And they don't like the fact that the president is trying to, you know, mix it up.
Well, the president has a different style. And maybe I'm more understanding of the president. I grew up in Queens. I knew guys like the president all my life, not guys as successful as he was. But that's the way we talk. I've learned to tone it down a bit. The president figured, hey, he's the president. He can say what he wants. So I'm not that offended by it. I've seen this all my life. But Bob Corker is more of a gentleman, I guess. He's not used to that type of, you know, barroom type brawl, which we see all the time in New York. But again, on serious matters and addressing the issues like the president's speech to the UN, the president's State of the Union speech, as far as dealing with foreign leaders, he's getting results. That's the bottom line.
Congressman Peter King, always good to see you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mother.
So still ahead tonight, the vice president stages a protest of his own at an NFL game this weekend. The former press secretary for the vice president joins me in a moment to answer the critics who say that was a stunt. Plus, in just less than 24 hours, the White House making huge moves on immigration, on health care, and a huge climate change rollback from the Obama administration. Karl Rove looks at what's going on behind all the bluster at the actual policy moves and where this means we're going next. The The NFL's national anthem debate reaching some new political heights. Vice President Pence was in Indianapolis Sunday to see the Colts take on the 49ers and to also see Peyton Manning's number get retired. But when more than 20 San Francisco players took a knee during the anthem, the vice president staged his own protest, and he and his wife walked out. He later explained on Twitter, "I left because the Colts game, because POTUS, the President of the United States, and I will not dignify any event that disrespects our soldiers, our flag, or our national anthem." President Trump added, quote, "I asked Vice President Pence to leave the stadium if any players kneeled, disrespecting our country. I am proud of him and Second Lady Karen." Mark Lauder is former press secretary to Vice President Pence, and he is here with some of the behind-the-scenes details on this. Mark, good to have you. Welcome to the program tonight.
Thank you for having me, Martha.
So talk to me a little bit about this, because now, you know, the backlash is that because of what you read in those tweets, that this was planned, that it was a stunt for the vice president to be there, and that they had to have known that a number of 49ers players, where Colin Kaepernick started this whole thing, were going to take a knee.
Well, it's absolutely the height of hypocrisy that liberals and Democrats celebrate the players who disrespect our flag, disrespect the national anthem, and the first responders and our troops who defend the freedoms that that flag represents, while at the same time questioning the vice president of whether he claimed it played a stunt. And in some quarters, they're actually questioning whether he should have even gone to the game, knowing that they might have taken a knee. And so obviously, you know, folks who support our freedoms, support that flag, support the national anthem, aren't even welcome, according to some of these liberal theories. I got to be honest with you, I think that's one of the reasons why President Trump won back in November, because for too long, too many Americans were told not to show up, to be quiet. While their jobs were sent overseas, we were looking the other way in terms of fighting our enemies and confronting the threats that remain. And President Trump really resonated with a message that said, enough. We're going to put America first and Americans first.
I want to play this for you. It's from the 49ers safety, Eric Reed, responding to the vice president leaving the game on Sunday. Watch.
I have the utmost respect for the military, the anthem, and the flag. So I would say that every time y'all interview me. This is about systemic oppression that has been rampant in this country for decades, on top of decades. It's really disheartening when everything that you were raised on, everything that I was raised on, was to be the best person I can be, to help people that need help. And the vice president of the United States is trying to confuse the message that we're trying to put out there. I don't know what else to say about it.
He talked in the beginning about how his family, many members of his family, including his mom, served in the military. So what do you say about that, Mark?
Well, what I would tell you is that the vice president is using the same platform to say that we stand for our flag, we stand for our national anthem. And as the vice president said on Twitter yesterday, we respect the right of everyone to express their opinions, and that there are times and places that have various serious discussions. The president, the White House welcome that. But while the American flag is on display, while we're playing our national anthem, that's not necessarily the time when we should be taking a knee and staging those protests. Everything has a time and a place, and that's just not the right one for many Americans.
So where does this end?
Well, I think you're seeing change take place right now. There are a number of teams. The Indianapolis Colts during that game yesterday, my personal team that I root for, none of them took a knee yesterday. We've seen that going on at stadiums across the country, and yet we can still have that discussion. So what we're saying is, let's have those discussions. Let's do it in a way where we can also respect the culture, the nature, and everything that flag represents, and the people who have sacrificed their lives in defending those freedoms.
All right, we got to leave it there, Mark. Thank you. But as you say, they have a right to take a knee, which they have expressed their ability to do, and the vice president had a right to leave in his own protest against that. So thank you very much, Mark. Good to have you here tonight.
Thank you.
So also developing this evening, the Trump White House making significant moves on 3 big policy priorities. Earlier, the EPA announcing the repeal of President Obama's signature climate change regulation, the Clean Power Plan. Coal is back, is the way they put it. Hours earlier, the White House laid out their conditions for any deal that would allow illegal immigrant dreamers to stay in the country. And this weekend, new details about the president's outreach to Democratic leader Chuck Schumer, working on a fix to Obamacare. Karl Rove is former senior advisor to President George W. Bush and a Fox News contributor. So, Karl, you can sort of see the way these pieces are all being laid out on the table. And the president would like to see movement on all 3 of these things. So he's kind of pushing them forward and saying, here's where I stand. What do you think?
I think it's less well organized than you might anticipate. The EPA action has been in the motion for months. It's very difficult to repeal a regulation. You have to do it in a very deliberate fashion. This has actually got two parts to it. One is to withdraw the Clean Power Rule, and the second of all is to open up a public comment session on things that could be done reasonably to control pollution at some of these coal-fired plants. But this has been underway for a long period of time. So I'd say that's being done in regular order, if you will. This has been planned. They've been working on it. This simply came to fruition at this time. The immigration thing, I think, is a reaction. President Trump cut the deal on DACA, said, I want to have a deal on DACA in a meeting with Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi. And it started to get a life of its own. And the White House realized we better have a negotiating position here. And so they put out this list of things that they want to see in return for a DACA deal. I think this is their opening bid, but this is reaction. Things started to move. They needed to act, and they did. The impulse is the call to Schumer over the weekend and maybe Nancy Pelosi to say, let's get a deal going on health care reform. I don't think they have a plan on that. It's dangerous to open a negotiation with Chuck Schumer unless you do have a plan. But I think that was just sort of impulse. The president said, why don't I call up Chuck? I had a good visit with he and Nancy in the Oval Office. Let me see if I can get the Democrats to agree.
He's clearly antsy to get that, done. That he doesn't want to leave it off the table. He doesn't like that it's considered a failure, at least at this point. And he wants to go back and try to get the win on that. It's possible they might go back to the Alexander Murray negotiation, which didn't really go anywhere, but it was a bipartisan negotiation. Perhaps they want to reopen that. Do you think there's any hope for that?
Well, there might be, but when you go into something like that, you better have a deliberate plan of what you're going to do, first of all, because otherwise you're going to give over the momentum, the initiative to the people that you're talking to. And second of all, you better make certain that that plan has some support among your allies. Don't surprise your allies by doing something impulsive. So I hope the president and the White House have a plan. I hope they've been discussing that plan with the significant players in the House and in the Senate, because they're going to have to rely upon them to actually do the negotiation, craft the legislation, and vote for it. So, but my sense is there wasn't that much thought on it. This, I think, caught a lot of people in Washington by surprise. I talked to a couple of members of the staffs on the House and Senate side, and their bosses knew nothing about it. And that's a problem. You got to do this thing a little bit more deliberately if you hope to move it forward.
Yeah, they definitely work in different ways. Congress likes to do everything very deliberately, and sometimes they say, oh, we only have 23 days to do that. I don't think we can start that now. We're going to have to wait till next year. And the president likes to, sort of get in there and like a bull in a china shop sometimes, and that doesn't always get well received. But that's just that's the way it is right now. Carl, thank you very much. Go ahead.
One quick note.
Yeah.
They have more than 23 days. That's 23 days of votes on the floor. Mm-hmm. A lot of work in Congress gets done outside of those days.
I think it's 30-something till the end of the year. Yeah. Which is, for normal people, is plenty of time.
It's 90 some odd days of work till the end of the year, so they could be working on this. They do have only a much smaller number of days to vote on it, though.
Thank you, Carl. Always good to see you, sir.
You bet. Thank you.
So some stunning allegations mount against now fired mega producer Harvey Weinstein.
There was no remorse. There was no even acknowledgement of the type of behavior that was going on.
New into us tonight, Weinstein's desperate and unsuccessful plea to fellow Hollywood bigwigs to try to get them to help him keep his job. And why have the Clintons and the Obamas continued to remain silent about all of this so far? Howie Kurtz and Mark Eiglarsh weigh in on this huge story next. Plus, is our nation's history of celebrating Columbus Day almost over? The debate over what has become a political flashpoint. And today it was a rainy Columbus Day parade, but they did it. We'll be right back. Harvey Weinstein, the Hollywood bigwig accused of sexual harassment that goes back over the course of 30 years, has officially been terminated from his own production company. The Sunday night announcement followed new allegations of more salacious and disgusting encounters that have been detailed by a couple of women over the weekend, as some in the media are accused of turning a blind eye to his conduct. Trace Gallagher is in our West Coast newsroom with more on this tonight. Trace.
Martha, Harvey Weinstein was fired in part because he broke the company's code of conduct in just the past few days. Variety magazine says the conduct violation is that he tried to intimidate his staffers into not cooperating with the investigation. And just hours before he was dismissed, Harvey Weinstein sent a letter to Hollywood CEOs asking for their support so he could, quote, take a leave of absence and get into heavy therapy and counseling to resurrect himself. Weinstein went on to ask the Hollywood heavy hitters to write a letter on his behalf, quote, saying, I'm desperate for your help. Just give me the time to have therapy. If the industry supports me, that's all I need. And since the New York Times broke the story, 3 more accusers have come forward, including former Fox News Channel anchor Lauren Sivan, who now works for Fox 11 here in Los Angeles. Today, Meryl Streep and Julianne Moore joined a long line of actors and actresses condemning Weinstein's behavior, with Moore tweeting, quote, coming forward about sexual abuse and coercion is scary, and women have nothing to be gained personally by doing so. But through their bravery, we move forward as a culture, and I thank them. Stand with Ashley Judd, Rose McGowan, and others. But other stars, like the self-described champion of female empowerment, Gwyneth Paltrow, have remained silent. As for the late-night hosts, their sexual harassment outrage appears to be somewhat selective. Watch.
O'Reilly's suddenly off the air. I mean, like, listen, like 2 weeks ago he was on, a week ago he was on, suddenly gone. This is huge.
Huge when Bill O'Reilly was facing sexual harassment allegations. Not so huge, apparently, for Harvey Weinstein. Granted, Colbert and Kimmel have tweeted negative Weinstein comments, but the subject is having trouble making it into the late-night monologues. For example, SNL prepared a Weinstein joke and then cut it out. Finally, we should note attorney Lisa Bloom, who made a career out of going after alleged sexual predators, is now being attacked on social media for defending one. Even her mom, Gloria Allred, was critical. Bloom has since resigned from representing Harvey Weinstein. Martha.
Yeah, that was pretty amazing. We talked about that on Friday night. Trace, thank you very much. So here with more, Howie Kurtz, host of Fox News Media Buzz, and Mark Eiglash, criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor. Gentlemen, welcome. Good to have you both here tonight. You know, as far as SNL goes, you know, they poke fun at almost everybody, and being edgy and provocative and going places where most people won't go is what they do. So why did they shy away from taking on one of their own? Howie?
You know, I'm not buying the explanation that they did the jokes before a studio audience. They fell flat because Harvey Weinstein is a New York guy. Come on, the guy got fired by the company that has his name on it. His brother fired him. He could have found something for Weekend Update. Same thing with the late night comedians. They basically built their brand this year, bashing President Trump and Republicans, and somehow they didn't see fit to touch this. Very different story when it involved Fox News.
Yeah, that's for sure. You know, Mark, weigh in on this part of the story. You know, the sort of double standard for how this is covered. Either it's, you know, reprehensible behavior, no matter who it's coming from or where they're, you know, what your political ideology is, or, you know, who's supportive of your industry or not. But that doesn't seem to be happening from Hollywood.
Right. With the SNL thing, I'm not saying, I mean, clearly the image of impropriety is there. I mean, you know, you make fun of all the major issues, and this one you left out. So it really looks bad. But their job is also to make it funny, and apparently it wasn't. I can buy into that just as easily. He's also not Donald Trump. To plausibly analogize him to Trump isn't necessarily fair. Weinstein isn't as well known, and so I can buy that explanation.
But the explanation was that it was to New York, that it was a to New York story, and people didn't get it. I mean, Donald Trump's from New York, too.
And the joke wasn't funny, Martha. I mean, apparently they ran it by, they cut a lot of stuff. It just wasn't funny.
Howie, what do you think?
Maybe it wasn't funny.
Howie?
Look, I mean, this thing just screams double standard. By the way, everybody knows who Harvey Weinstein is.
Everybody does. Everybody knows Shakespeare in Love. Everybody knows Good Will Hunting. Everybody, I mean, there's a million ways that you could make it, you know, understandable to people who might not know who Harvey Weinstein is, who they're talking about. You know, Mark, in terms of the legal side of this, let me stay with you for a moment on this. Fired by his own company, pushed out for breaking their own code. Thoughts?
Well, that was the right thing to do from every perspective. But here's the problem. My biggest problem with this is what happened? Now, most of us know, I mean, 8 lawsuits were settled, 3 decades of abuse allegations. But we were told just last week, I accept responsibility. I've angered a lot of people. I've hurt a lot of people, and I'm going to go get therapy. Then we also heard that don't believe everything you read. What the New York Times put out there is false and defamatory, and we're going to sue. Which one is it? Pick one, just so we know where you're going with this.
Yeah, and Lisa Bloom, who everybody's very familiar with, who was, one of the lead attorneys against Bill O'Reilly and against many people out there who have these accusations, stood up for Harvey Weinstein, was tutoring him to teach him now how not to be a dinosaur. And now her own mother said that she would defend the people who were accusing Harvey Weinstein, even if her daughter was involved. She's changed her mind, Howie.
Well, I spoke to Lisa Bloom today, and she says one thing the New York Times published about her was flat out false, that it was a lie, and that was the notion that she was suggesting putting out pictures of some of the women who were accusing Harvey Weinstein in friendly encounters with him. She was just saying those pictures are out there. The media have them. They're going to be out there. As far as the larger point, and you mentioned, or Trace mentioned about the Democrats, Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, he held fundraisers for them. Haven't heard a word, and that really reinforces the point that some people just get a pass if they're part of the sort of liberal Hollywood movie backslapping culture.
Double standard. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Good to see you tonight. So coming up next is Columbus Day comes to a close. Tensions surrounding the holiday and what it symbolizes come to a head. We'll hear from both sides of that debate next. So today is Columbus Day. It used to mean a parade and a day off from school, but now many are wondering if today was maybe the last one. Are we saying goodbye to Columbus and hello to Indigenous Peoples Day? From Boston to Chicago to L.A., Christopher Columbus statues have been toppled and spattered with blood, like that one, vandalized as people object to the explorers' treatment of Indigenous people over 500 years ago. It's just the latest in a long line of cultural battles that we've seen in the country, and complicates the history as we observe. Here now to debate, John O. Caldwell, Fox News political analyst and founder of Caldwell Strategic Consulting, and Richard Fowler, a nationally syndicated radio talk show host who you know well, and Fox News contributor. Welcome to both of you. So, John, let me start with you. Are we going to say goodbye to Columbus?
Certainly not. I think it's important that we must know the entire history when it comes to Christopher Columbus. I definitely get that. And here in L.A., they chose to name today Indigenous People Day. So that's pretty interesting. But what I must say, when it comes to the defacing of these statues, which is American history, we have to be honest about that, I see this as another opportunity for people to continue on the momentum of Charlottesville, where they're taking down statues all over the country. That's illegal. It's against the law. They shouldn't do that. There, in 2016, there was a report that showed that there were about 718 statues and monuments of the Confederacy. Yeah. And since Charlottesville, there's been dozens of local towns that have removed those things illegally. So I'm thinking that this is more of some of the Antifa groups that want to take the law into their own hand and destroy public property. Yeah, here in New York, they've got 24/7 surveillance. They have to dedicate police officers to protecting Columbus Circle, which is a huge circle in New York City, if you haven't seen it, with a tremendously huge statue. There it is, in the middle of it. And I'm wondering, Richard, why they don't just put a camera on it. And if anybody touches that, they should be arrested for defacing public property. I mean, you can't go down the street breaking the windows in Manhattan, and you can't rip down a statue. I mean, how is this a logical way to go about doing this?
Well, it isn't a logical way to go about doing this, and I think I abhor, just as many folks at home abhor, the violence against these type of statues. But I think it's important to sort of separate this from the fight over the Civil War statues, because indeed, when Christopher Columbus came to the New World, so they called it, there was already people here, all right? So he really didn't discover much, because there were indigenous folks already living here who had discovered the land. Now, with that being said, Martha, this is actually an issue where we can find middle ground, whether we like it or not. In Salt Lake City, Utah, they actually celebrate Columbus Day and Indigenous People Day, where the Native Americans came together with the city council, and they said, let's celebrate both. There are those who want to celebrate the heritage of Christopher Columbus. But let's talk about, I mean, there have been new books written about Christopher Columbus, who apparently executed Spaniards because they mistreated the Native Americans. It really was the American and the English, really, who gave the Indians, the most violence and pushback. Columbus was basically here on a religious mission. It became complicated, obviously. But, I feel like sometimes we just sort of want to make a repository for anger into a person. And I think, we need to take a step back and look at the history. Gianna?
Yeah. And then Christopher Columbus, he was said to be an individual who would deliver Christianity throughout parts that didn't know Christianity. So that's one part of the history that we don't normally hear. But what we see now more than ever is people really taking the law into their own hands. It's no longer going through the legal process to get things done. It's like, hey, we hate Trump, so we're going to do whatever it takes to do something that's going to discredit Trump or whatever people that agree with Trump thinks. And I think that's where it's becoming. There's anger everywhere. And I won't say that the president isn't at fault for some of the things, but certainly not all.
I think this indigenous people movement goes far beyond President Trump, and I think this has been a movement 20 or 30 years in the making, where folks saying Christopher Columbus came to this country. People would argue, there's scholars that argue he brought smallpox. There's scholars that argue that he sort of brought over, because he came first, the Europeans came after and did horrible things to the indigenous people here. But I think what the indigenous folks are saying is, hey, listen, we discovered this land first, and we deserve the day too.
Sorry, guys, I'm going to get cut off. We'll be right back with more.
It's good to be back. Good to see
you.
You
too.
Martha.
Thanks.
This week, it's a new Fox and Friends First.
So we leave you tonight with this quote from the then young explorer as he set off on a mission for Queen Isabella from Spain. He wrote this on October 17, 1492, from what he described as the Indies. I assure your highnesses that these lands are the most fertile, temperate, level, and beautiful countries in the world. Indeed, he was right. He was in the Caribbean at the time, but the rest of the Americas did turn out to be beautiful as well. Historians say that his interactions with the native people was, quote, benign, and that he did not seek to push them out. That is our story tonight. We'll see you back here tomorrow night for more at 7 p.m. Tucker Carlson is up next.